year at seminary, my father confessor said something to me which has stuck with me for all these years and comes to my mind quite frequently. I can't remember the context of what it was, except that I was in confession. And I'm sure I was confessing something to the effect that I felt completely inadequate to the tasks ahead of me. But he said to me this phrase, he said that people will not come to a well where there is no water to drink. People will not come to a well where there is no water to drink. Well, yeah, of course. The same comes frequently to my mind as a pastor. One of the major challenges of the priesthood is, of course, maintaining spiritual hydration, having something to offer someone to drink. A wise man once said, "You cannot transmit something you haven't got." And this is true not just for pastors, but for all Christians, for all people. You cannot transmit something you haven't got. If we want to be good parents, good mentors, good friends, good siblings, you name it, we have to make sure we ourselves are in a condition that is healthy, that is able to give others what they need. We know that if our own spiritual life is dry and empty, whatever we will say, even if it's 100% right, will lack something. It will lack conviction. It will lack strength. It will lack faith. And so we would rather not be put on the spot and reveal our dryness and our lack of moisture. And so we try to avoid those situations entirely, so others will not see how spiritually bankrupt we are. And that makes the problem even worse, because then we're letting ourselves stay dry and get drier by the minute. But here is the good news and the twist. No matter how spiritually healthy we may think we are or hope to be, even then, whatever we have to give is in the end not of ourselves. Knowing and accepting this truth is the key to actually becoming healthy and well hydrated, spiritually speaking. And in fact, we can see this in today's gospel and in the epistle. Let's look at the epistle first. This is the first chapter of Corinthians. Corinthians was a parish, a community with many problems. And if you read through the two epistles, you'll see how many problems that they had. But the first epistle that St. Paul takes them to task for is what? That they had divisions, that they were factional, that they had cliques, that they had infighting with each other. And maybe they weren't even fighting, but they were taking sides against each other. So eventually they would probably fight. They had a divided mind with themselves. And the way that they divided themselves was attaching themselves to personalities. I am of Apollos, I am of Peter or Cephas, or even I am of Christ. Notice that St. Paul doesn't even let those people off the hook, because one can say, oh yeah, those people who align themselves to Apollos and Cephas, they're factional partisans, but I belong to Christ, and therefore I'm above all that. Well, as soon as we put ourselves in that position of judging the other and putting ourselves on a pedestal, we've done the same thing. And so it's hypocritical. So St. Paul doesn't let them get away with it either. So his correction is to bring them back to the central message of the gospel. What is that? Christ crucified. Christ crucified. And when Christians say Christ crucified, they also mean Christ risen, because we never separate the two. The whole of the gospel, his passion, his suffering, his dying on the cross, his burial, and his third-day resurrection and ascension into heaven. He keeps it simple, though, by just pointing to the cross, lest he himself get wrapped up in the eloquence of his own words, and so by wisdom of words, kind of lose the message. For in the end, how does the cross lend itself to human boasting or ego-driven, personality-driven ministries. It doesn't. The cross puts all that away. The cross puts that in the trash bin where it belongs. How is the cross going to help us prop up ourselves and our egos by saying, I belong to this camp, or I belong to that camp, or I am a respectable member of a respectable and august body, the church. And therefore all these other people, well, the cross dismantles all of our egotism. The cross, in fact, calls us to foolishness. Foolishness in the eyes of the world. That is to suffer, to take on suffering, and in abiding humility, rely on the power of God, which is saving us. In Matthew 14, we see this in action. Here the Lord demonstrates His sovereignty and His power. The disciples, probably very tired at the end of a long day of ministry, to all these multitudes who came out to find Jesus in the wilderness, where He went out by Himself to pray, but they all followed Him out there, so He couldn't get a moment's peace. They figured, well, enough is enough. Lord, send these people away. Let them go off and get something to eat. They probably were thinking about eating themselves. And so Jesus instead asks them, in fact tells them, to do the impossible. He says, they don't have to leave. You give them something to eat. Lord, all we have are 5 loaves and 2 fish. That's not even enough to feed the 12 disciples a good meal. I don't care how big the fish is. It's not going to be enough. But of course, you know the story. Jesus takes the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. He blesses them, He breaks them, He multiplies them, and distributes them. And what happens? 5,000 men, plus innumerable women and children, are fed, satisfied, and there are 12 baskets left over. So Christ revealed to them and to us that it is not our own power or our own resources that He wants or expects us to rely on. He expects us to rely on the power of God. He provides all that which is useful, all which is needed. So even the most spiritually well-nourished and hydrated and healthy minister cannot multiply a single loaf of bread. I'm sorry, I can't do that for you. I can go to a giant and get you some more, but that's the limit. I don't have any special superpowers. If any of us, all the way from the metropolitan down to the newest catechumen, thinks that they're going to make a difference in the life of other people, we must do so by beginning with the understanding that it is Christ who will make it happen, and not ourselves. Christ is the agent of change and grace. But we'll say, well, what does that mean then? Just let God do it. Well, that's not entirely the whole story. We are not monophysite. We do not believe that the divine just comes in and sweeps away our humanity and replaces it with Himself. Rather, He assumes our humanity and keeps it intact. How does He do that? In a daily purpose. Well, first of all, of course, you know, He assumes our humanity in Christ Jesus, taking up our humanity. All that it is. Body, soul, spirit, will, mind, thought. Everything except sin, which properly does not belong to humanity, but is a distortion of our nature. And so we in turn have to do the same for Him. We bring to Him our humanity if we want to be useful in God's plan. How so? Well, you see there are 5 loaves and 2 fish. Whenever you see the number 5, that's very often a symbol in the Bible, or the Fathers interpret it allegorically, as a symbol for humanity. Because humanity is a 5-fold being in so many ways. We have 5 senses. We have, if you remember Da Vinci's little pentagram, we have 5 points on our bodies. We are composed of the 5 elements of the universe, if you follow the classical scheme of the universe. And the two fish, well, what are the fish? The fish are those things which swim beneath the surface, that which you cannot see, but you know are there. The soul, the spirit, or you could say our thoughts, our feelings. These are the fish. So we bring our 5 loaves, the 5 loaves of our body, and the 2 fish of our mind and our spirit, and we bring those to God and let Him do His work. And what does He do? Well, what did He do with our humanity the first time He took it up? He put it on the cross. Or rather, He let it be put on the cross and gave it up for the sake of the world. He let Himself suffer. And then He rose again. And then He lifted that humanity all the way to heaven and sat it on the right hand of the Father. He does the same with our humanity, which you may not like to hear. He lets us suffer. He lets us take up our cross and follow Him. He lets us go through whatever it is that we need to go through, whatever breaking needs to be broken in us, so that we will finally understand love and self-sacrifice. He lets that happen. Then He lifts us up out of the darkness, out of our injury, out of our pain, out of our fear, out of our shame, out of whatever death and prison holds us. And then He transforms us and takes us up into heaven. He takes our 5 loaves and our 2 fish, and He blesses them. He breaks them. He divides them. He multiplies them. He makes them more abundant than they were before. So yeah, some days we feel like we're up on the cross. And some days we feel like we're in heaven. And that's all part of the story. But our role and our task in this story is to be willing to obey His command. Bring them here to me. Bring yourself here to me. Come to me, and I will give you rest. Take up your cross and follow me. Come to me. This is the daily choice that we must make as Christians, the daily exercise of our will towards God. First, we bring ourselves and our whole life, and then one another, to Christ our God. And He takes us and multiplies, so that eventually, not only are we satisfied, not only are we filled spiritually, but we have something to give to others. And we become a well that has water, a well to which the people can come to drink, because Christ has made it so. And all this we did because we trusted Him, we came to Him, we believed in Him. And that's all there is to it. Now you may find yourself wondering, well, I don't know if I can do that. Or that some days it's just too hard. Last weekend, when I was in Michigan for Sophie and Bogdan and Alexis's wedding, we had the great pleasure of catching some Joel Osteen on the cable TV there at the hotel. And Joel Osteen has this tagline, which you may have heard before. It says, God will not bring you to it unless He's going to bring you through it. I love that. That's great. Because it's true. It's just not necessarily true the way Joel Osteen preaches it. Some of the examples he gave well, somebody, their car broke down, but this was God's way of letting them know that they were about to get 2 sports cars in return. That's awesome. I hope that happens to every single one of us. The Lord knows the make and model of my dreams. But that's not why He died on the cross. It's not why He suffered on the cross and was laid in a tomb, so that we could have 2 sports cars instead of 1 junker. He died on the cross so He could bring us to what we need to face in this life, even death, and bring us through it. That's the real to it and through it. That's the real abundance of the gospel. The abundance that Christ preaches is the abundance of life itself, eternal life. And we get that by going through the cross, accepting the cross, which seems like foolishness to the world, but is the power of God to us who are being saved. And I just want to close with you one story to let you ponder on this. On your bulletin, there's this beautiful icon here in small form. These are the 9 Kerkolije brothers with their mother and sister in the country of Georgia, not the state. And as you know, Georgia is one of the oldest Orthodox nations in the world, and they have fought and suffered and bled for the faith to keep, just simply to stay alive and keep themselves Orthodox for many, many centuries. And in one of those centuries, there was a very difficult time. The Shah of Persia was invading with a massive army. The Georgians were outnumbered, but they went forward in faith. And they gathered on the day before the battle. And all the soldiers were lined up to receive Holy Communion from the bishop. And the bishop was preparing to give them Holy Communion, and the soldiers cried out to the bishop, take up a sword and join us, and we'll give each other Holy Communion. Pretty amazing thing to say. And the bishop was so moved by what he said, I will stand with you today and wear my vestments, and they will be dyed in blood. He didn't have a sword because he was a bishop. Maybe he had a little staff. But he didn't take any weapons other than the cross. And he went into battle with them. And the story of the 9 brothers and their mother and their sister is that given to them, these 9 brothers, was the specific task of holding the banner for the army. And the battle was fierce, and they were doing well, but the devil worked against them, and word was sown through the troops that their king had been killed. The king was not killed, it was a colonel, and they had the same name, but people made the mistake of assuming it was the king, and they began to panic, and they began to rout, and they began to flee, and the 9 brothers had to hold the banner and hold the line, and one by one of them, each one was killed in turn, until there were none left. And so the sister took up the banner and held the banner of the Georgian people with the cross upon it, no doubt. And she was struck down. And then the mother took up the banner and held it up with the cross high in the air. And then she was struck down. And the Georgians lost the battle. Why did you tell me this? That's horrible. That's a terrible story. Oh, what are we supposed to feel good about that? Well, you saw Braveheart, right? Freedom! Sometimes losing is winning. Sometimes giving your life for something greater than yourself is the victory that God has brought you to, and will only bring you through the most painful of ways, through the cross. If you're a modern thinker, and you have the wisdom of the world in your mind, you hear a story like that and say, what a waste. What foolishness. What's the point of that? Where's the sports cars? But if you are being saved, you realize this is awesome. It's not death or glory. It is death and glory. It is the cross and the resurrection. That is the power of God. That is the power we need to rely on. Christ crucified, Christ risen. Christ is among us.